I have to be honest with you. The moment I heard the latest update about Dave Coulier, the actor so many of us grew up watching on Full House, I felt that familiar mix of shock and curiosity that only real-life twists can create. And the more I dug into the details, the more I realized this story isn't just about an actor with another diagnosis. It's also about strength, timing, resilience, and those strange moments in life where you think one hurdle is behind you, only to discover another waiting around the corner. So today, I want to walk you through this entire journey in a way that constantly surprised me as I learned it, because every piece of it creates its own mini revelation. And just when you think the story hits its emotional peak, something else opens up that makes you want to keep following the path. It all starts with Dave appearing on the Today Show. And here's the thing. You'd expect that after overcoming stage 3 non-Hodgkin lymphoma earlier in the year, his next public moment would be celebratory, maybe filled with relief. But instead, he shared something completely unexpected. He had just been diagnosed with a new, totally unrelated type of cancer called P16 squamous carcinoma, a form of head and neck cancer. And hearing him explain that this wasn't connected to his previous lymphoma was one of those moments where your brain goes, wait, how can someone get back-to-back diagnoses that aren't even related? But then immediately after that heavy reveal, there's this twist. You learn that the cancer was caught because he simply went in for a routine checkup and follow-up scan, the kind of appointment most people tend to push off or forget. And it's one of those subtle aha moments where you find yourself thinking, wow, showing up for those appointments really matters more than we admit. And right when you absorb that, Dave adds another layer, revealing that during his earlier cancer journey, he started removing toxic products from his life, cleaning up his environment as much as he could while going through chemotherapy. And that whole process inspired him to create something called Aware Market, a place focused on toxin-free holistic products. Again, a surprise move, but also a reminder of how people sometimes build meaningful new parts of their life out of the hardest chapters. And as soon as that gives you a small hit of hope, you're pulled right back to the reality that this wasn't even his first fight, because when he first shared his lymphoma diagnosis back in late 2024, he explained it all began with what seemed like an ordinary upper respiratory infection that caused swelling in his lymph nodes, which then led to testing, which then led to the life-changing news. That sequence hits you with another micro insight. Sometimes the body whispers before it shouts, and listening early matters. And if you remember how personal cancer already was for him, the emotional stakes go deeper because he told the world that he had lost his mother, his sister Sharon, and his niece Shannon all to cancer, with two of them passing incredibly young. And even his older sister Karen was going through her own fight at the same time he was battling lymphoma. So suddenly, this story becomes more than just a medical update. It becomes a layered history of a family repeatedly tested by the same challenge. And realizing that context feels like stepping into a deeper chapter of his life. What struck me is how he said he kept thinking about how strong the women in his family were, and that if he could be even 0.1% as strong as them, he'd make it through. And there's something oddly comforting about hearing someone who made an entire generation laugh describe his inspiration not as fame or resources, but as simple human strength he saw at home. And then, of course, the emotional pendulum swings again, because earlier this year, he spoke about the grueling rounds of chemotherapy he went through, admitting that some days he wasn't sure where things were heading. And that honesty hits you with a dose of reality. It's not always a dramatic movie moment. Sometimes it's just endurance, uncertainty, and trying to show up again tomorrow. And right after that moment of seriousness, there's another surprising emotional twist, because his wife Melissa shared that after his 5th round of chemotherapy, he turned to her and admitted that he wasn't sure he could keep going, and that they even had what-if conversations about life, about outcomes, about the possibilities no one wants to consider. This isn't doom or negativity, it's the truth of what real people talk about when everything feels uncertain. And hearing that adds such a human layer that you can't help but feel more compelled to follow the rest of the story. But Dave being Dave, he didn't stay in that dark emotional space. He said that he wanted to keep living. He wanted to push forward. And that mindset shift becomes another tiny dopamine hit, a reminder that even when someone is overwhelmed, they can still choose hope.
And just when you think the emotional arc is slowing down, the story spins again, because now, after beating lymphoma earlier in the year, he gets hit with this unrelated P16 squamous carcinoma. But instead of reacting with defeat or exasperation, he opens the next chapter by saying the new cancer is treatable and that he'll be doing targeted radiation. This again sparks a small, "Wait, so there's a plan?" moment, and that sense of direction pulls the viewer forward with just enough optimism to stay engaged. Listening to him talk about early detection, about paying attention to symptoms, and about getting regular checkups made me reflect personally on how often we all ignore those little signs our bodies give us. Not out of laziness, but because life gets chaotic, the calendar fills up, and we convince ourselves that whatever we're feeling is minor. His story hits like a reminder that the smallest appointment can change the entire trajectory of your health, and that lands harder when the person saying it has lived the experience more than once. And then another curiosity spark. Why does someone who's already been through so much still keep this calm, grounded tone? And this is where the next layer appears. Dave says he made a promise to himself and his wife that he would stay strong, and that he didn't want fear to take over their lives. What I personally respect about that is that he never pretends strength came naturally or easily. He openly admits the fear was there, the tough days were there, the conversations that no one wants to have were there, but he still chose resilience, which makes his calmness feel real rather than performative. And in the middle of all this emotional weight, another surprising insight drops. He tells fans to take great care of themselves, not in a preachy or dramatic way, but by reminding people that simple medical steps like talking to your doctor, getting screenings, and checking in on your health can have a major impact. It sounds obvious on the surface, but when someone who has walked through so many chapters of loss and survival says it, it feels less like advice and more like lived truth. And that loops us into another breadcrumb, because the story isn't just about battles. It's about the way people rebuild their lives during and after them. The fact that Dave was inspired to create a marketplace centered around cleaner living while he was going through chemotherapy shows how the hardest experiences can shift your priorities in unexpected ways. And that little twist adds a layer of curiosity about what motivated him internally and how these experiences changed his worldview. When I reflect on his journey, what stands out to me personally is the way he moves between vulnerability and optimism so fluidly. He doesn't sugarcoat the hard moments, but he never lets them define the whole story either. It's the kind of balance that makes people relatable, even if they're well known. And as the story winds back to his most recent diagnosis, you realize that it doesn't close on fear or hopelessness. It closes on preparedness, clarity, and determination. He found the cancer early. It is treatable. There is a clear plan, and most importantly, he's already shown that he can walk through difficult chapters with honesty and strength. And if there's one more subtle but powerful takeaway in all this, it's the reminder that even people who seem larger than life, actors, icons, beloved TV personalities, are walking through human experiences every day, and the way they navigate them can end up inspiring people in ways no one expects. I think stories like Dave's stick with us not because they're dramatic, but because they're real, layered, unpredictable, and filled with those small moments of clarity that remind us to appreciate our own health, our relationships, our time, and our ability to adapt. And that's why revisiting his journey feels so important right now. It's not just news, it's a human reminder of strength, early detection, emotional honesty, and the simple truth that even after one battle ends, life can surprise you again. And when it does, how you face it becomes its own story.